Hey guys, having trouble sleeping tonight again? You're lying there restless, staring at the ceiling, maybe scrolling on your phone far too late, and your brain is spinning in 20 directions. Well, tonight, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to take you so far back in time, so deep into the story of you, that your thoughts about tomorrow's to-do list won't even be able to follow. Imagine drifting away into a world where the air smells faintly of dust and rain on stone, where there are no cities, no cars, no emails, just the slow heartbeat of the earth. This is the story of human evolution. And spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't survive the first hour in it. Don't forget to subscribe and share this channel with someone who loves soft bedtime stories. Tonight, let your mind drift along with us, and may this soothing story help you find the sweetest dreams. And before we dive in, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Or even better, tell me how you're feeling right now. Let's make this our little nighttime campfire, where it's safe to share your worries, so you can let them go. Maybe pull a blanket a little tighter around you. Listen to the quiet sounds of your room and prepare to drift peacefully into our tale. You start your journey, not as a human at all, but as something far smaller, far simpler, a collection of atoms scattered across the cold dust of the early universe. Those atoms, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, iron, were born in the hearts of giant stars. They burned brightly for millions of years, then collapsed in spectacular explosions, flinging their innards across space. Some of those fragments wandered aimlessly until 4.5 billion years ago, they found themselves swirling together in a glowing disk of gas and dust. At the heart of that disk, the sun was born, encircling it. A little blue planet began to take shape. For ages, Earth was just molten chaos, a hellish landscape of lava and steam. Slowly it cooled. Oceans formed shallow seas, cradled strange chemical soups, and somewhere in that mix life sparked. Historians still argue whether it happened in sunlit shallows or deep dark vents at the bottom of the sea. Either way, life got its foot in the door, and once it was in it, refused to leave. For billions of years, life was small microbes drifting in the water, living, dividing, dying, and leaving behind their whisper-thin fossils. But over time, life experimented. It grew shells. It sprouted fins. It crawled onto land on stubby legs. Eventually, a group of curious, hairy little creatures began swinging through trees in tropical forests. They weren't yet human, not even close. But the first faint outlines of your body plan were there forward, facing eyes, nimble hands, brains, just clever enough to avoid becoming lunch. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some of your earliest primate ancestors were barely bigger than squirrels, and they might have survived the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs simply because they could hide in tiny burrows and eat almost anything. Imagine your great-great-great times a million grandparent as a cute, jittery tree dweller blinking at a post-dinosaur world. From these tiny survivors came lemurs, monkeys, and eventually the great apes. Millions of years pass in a slow rolling tide of change. Forests stretch and shrink. Climates swing from warm to cold and back again. In Africa, some apes begin to spend more time on the ground. Grasslands replace dense jungle, and walking upright just part of the time at first becomes handy. It frees the hands, lets you carry food, or a stick, or your baby. And just like that, the first steps towards standing tall have begun. It's strange to think that you carry echoes of those ancient days in your body right now. Your spine still curves like a climber's. Your hands still twitch to grip like a branch is nearby. Even your love of a shady tree on a hot day is an old memory of where you came from. The truth about human evolution is that it's not a straight ladder from caveman to iPhone user. It's a tangled, twisting tree. branches sprout, flourish, then wither and vanish. Others split again, reaching in new directions. And you're just one tiny twig on that tree, swaying gently in the breeze of time, still standing here tonight under the soft hum of your room's light, or maybe the glow of your phone screen. You are the living proof of a cosmic story that began in the hearts of stars and has wandered patiently across the ages. And as the night deepens, you take your first step into that story, not as a historian or a scientist, but as a dreamer following the long footprints of your own past. You're standing now on a plain that stretches so far, you can't see the end of it. Golden grass whispering in the breeze, the air warm and dry. This isn't a dream. This is Africa, several million years ago, and the footprints you see ahead of you belong to Australopithecus. These early ancestors aren't yet human in the way you think of it, but they've already made a leap that will echo through time. They walk upright, their bare feet pressing patterns into the earth. Historians still argue whether their upright stance began because they needed to spot predators, free their hands to carry food, or simply move more efficiently between scattered trees. Either way, it changed everything. Walking upright meant energy could be spent traveling longer distances, exploring wider territories, and finding more varied food. The Letoli footprints in Tanzania are one of the most famous traces. They left in impressions frozen in ancient volcanic ash, nearly 3.6 million years ago. You can almost imagine them walking together, a small group, perhaps a family, the adults guiding the young, all of them glancing around nervously for lurking dangers. Australopithecus had long arms for climbing and relatively small brains, around a third the size of yours, but don't underestimate them. They were survivors cleverly straddling two worlds, 1 foot in the trees, 1 foot on the open plain. By day, they might forage for tuberous fruits or insects, keeping an eye out for hyenas or saber-toothed cats. By night, they might return to the safety of branches to sleep. A quirky tidbit. Scientists believe they sometimes walked with a swaying, slightly awkward gait. Think of a toddler who's just learned to run. So yes, your ancestors may have crossed prehistoric Africa looking a little bit like enthusiastic toddlers who forgot their destination. The landscape they knew was a patchwork of woodland and grassland dotted with watering holes and rocky outcrops. Imagine the smell of dry grass crushed underfoot, the sound of distant thunder promising rare rain, the hum of insects in the heat. This was no gentle stroll life. Here was a constant balance between finding enough to eat and avoiding becoming something else's dinner. And yet, there's something deeply familiar about them. Watch an Australopithecus mother bend to help her child over a rock. See the way two adults stand a little closer when a shadow moves in the grass. Hear the low, reassuring vocal sounds they share to keep the group together. The seeds of your own social instincts were already planted here long before words existed. Walking upright also freed their hands for something remarkable, carrying things. Food tools babies, suddenly they could bring the world with them instead of leaving it behind. That was a small, almost invisible revolution, but it meant their world wasn't just where they were standing. It was where they could take things. The truth about this moment in human evolution is that it wasn't a sudden leap, but a slow unfurling. Step by step, stride by stride, your ancestors left the shelter of the forest and began to claim the open land. They weren't thinking about history or destiny. They were thinking about the next meal, the next sip of water, the next safe place to sleep. But every footprint they pressed into the soft ground was a promise that one day beings like you would follow, not just to survive, but to understand. And here you are, millions of years later, standing in their tracks under the quiet hum of your nighttime room, tracing their journey as if it were your own. You feel the air grow heavier, thicker, with the scent of freshly struck stone, and the faint smoke of a campfire long since gone cold. You've moved forward in time, about 2.4 million years, and now you're walking beside a very different kind of ancestor, Homo habilis, the handyman. They're shorter than you, maybe just over a meter tall, but their hands are doing something revolutionary. Clutched between thick fingers is a chunk of stone. With a sharp tap against another rock, a flake shears off, exposing a fresh, razor-sharp edge. It's the simplest of tools, an older one chopper, but it changes everything. Suddenly, bones can be split open to get to the rich, fatty marrow inside. Meat from scavenged carcasses can be scraped away more easily. Tubers can be sliced instead of gnawed. Historians still argue whether Homo habilis was a skilled hunter or more of an opportunistic scavenger, trailing behind bigger predators to snatch the leftovers. Either way, tool-making gave them a competitive edge, one that meant the difference between life and starvation. A quirky little tidbit: these first stone tools were so basic that modern chimpanzees might manage to copy them with some training. But here's the difference: Homo habilis made them deliberately over and over, teaching the craft from one generation to the next. This was no accident. It was a tradition in the making. Look around their world, open savannas with pockets of woodland, the heat shimmering above the grass. In the distance, vultures spiral above some unlucky animal's remains. You hear sharp calls between group members, a kind of proto-language. Maybe just a few syllables, but enough to share urgency, warning, and excitement. One individual gestures to you, pointing toward the circling birds. You follow your bare feet, sinking into warm soil, your heartbeat quickening. When they reach the carcass, the air is thick with the smell of raw meat and predator musk. Lions have already eaten their fill, but with their stone tools, Homo habilis can claim what's left. A flake scrapes against bone, a chopper splits a joint, and for a moment the group works with quiet efficiency. This is survival, not by brute force, but by cleverness. And in the evenings, around the faint glow of a fire, if they've learned to keep one, they might share food and huddle together for warmth. Their brains are slightly bigger than those of Australopithecus, their faces flatter, their jaws less massive. They are still a long way from modern humans, but you can see the first sparks of the mind that will someday paint caves, write poems, and binge late-night videos about human evolution. What's striking is how quickly these tools become central to their identity. Just as you wouldn't head into a modern city without your phone and keys, Homo habilis wouldn't wander far without a chopper in hand. And like your favorite coffee mug or lucky pen, these tools carried a personal touch, shaped for a hand that knew exactly what it wanted to do. The truth about this stage of evolution is that once our ancestors learned to shape the world with their hands, the rest of the journey became inevitable. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about bending the environment to fit their needs. And as you stand here tonight, holding an imaginary stone in your palm, you feel that ancient confidence, small but growing, slip quietly into your bones. It's the same confidence you'll carry into tomorrow, even if you're just cutting your sandwich neatly in half instead of stripping a zebra carcass under the African sun. The air cools and you notice the flicker of orange light, licking at the edges of the dark. The scent of smoke drifts toward you, wood, dry grass, maybe even a hint of roasted meat. You've stepped into a new chapter about 1.5 million years ago, and you're in the company of Homo erectus, the fire tamer. Around you, a small group huddles close to a carefully tended blaze. It's more than warmth, it's magic. Firelight pushes back the shadows where predators lurk. Sparks whirl up into the night like tiny stars fleeing gravity. The ground near the flames is littered with stone tools far more advanced than the clumsy choppers of Homo habilis. These are Herculean hand axes, tear-shaped, symmetrical, sharp on every edge. The skill it takes to make them is astonishing, and once you've seen one, you'll never mistake it for a random rock again. Historians still argue whether Homo erectus discovered fire themselves or stole it from nature, perhaps from lightning strikes or burning grasslands, and then learned how to keep it alive. Either way, the ability to control fire changed everything. A quirky tidbit for you archaeologists have found evidence that Homo erectus might have been cooking food over 1 million years ago. Cooking didn't just make food tastier. It broke down fibers, made meat easier to chew, and released more calories. In short, it supercharged the diet, which may have helped fuel bigger brains. You can thank fire for the fact that you can stream late-night documentaries instead of gnawing raw tubers in the dark. Watch them now. One member of the group pokes at the glowing embers with a stick, adding small twigs to keep the heat steady. Another slices strips of meat and lays them on flat stones near the fire's edge to cook. You can hear the quiet sizzling smell of the fat as it drips and pops. A child sits between two adults' eyes wide at the dancing flames. No one has to say it, this is safety, a rare commodity in their world. By day, Homo erectus roams far. They're taller, leaner than earlier humans, with longer legs perfect for covering great distances. Their brains are larger, about 2/3 the size of yours, and their toolkits are growing more sophisticated. They track herds, ambush prey, and when possible, take advantage of fire to drive animals toward waiting hunters. Evenings are different now. The fire draws them together. Perhaps they make simple sounds to share the day's news. Perhaps they pass on skills, teaching the young how to chip a perfect edge or keep the fire alive through the night. Sitting here with them, you realize that fire has done something more profound than just cooking dinner. It's given them extra hours in the day. After sunset, life no longer shuts down completely. There's time for talking, for thinking, for planning. The truth about this moment in human evolution is that fire isn't just a tool, it's a turning point. With warmth, light-cooked food, and protection from predators, life expectancy might have stretched a little longer. But more importantly, fire lit the first embers of community. Around the flames, humans began to be more than just survival machines. They became storytellers. And here in your quiet room tonight, maybe with the dim glow of a lamp casting its own small circle of light, you feel that same ancient comfort. You can almost hear the low murmur of voices in the dark, the soft crackle of burning wood, the shared knowledge that as long as the fire burns, you are safe. The morning air is crisp and the sky stretches wide above you, deep blue over endless golden grass. You've moved forward in time again, though not by much. And now the small campfire communities have grown into roving bands of expert foragers. You are walking beside early Homo sapiens, and perhaps their close cousins fully adapted to a life as hunters-gatherers and surprisingly storytellers. The day begins with movement. Men, women, and children head out together, eyes scanning the ground for signs, a faint trail through grass, a broken twig, a track in the soft earth. They hunt antelope, follow migrating herds, fish in rivers, and collect berries, nuts, and roots. Everyone has a role. The smallest children forage for edible plants or dig for grubs. Yes, grubs. You're not above eating them out here. They're protein-rich, and according to some who've tried them, taste a bit like almonds. Historians still argue about exactly when Homo sapiens began using complex hunting strategies, coordinated drives, ambushes, traps. But by now it's clear they are no longer just reacting to the world. They're shaping it. Spears are tipped with sharpened stone points, some even hardened in fire. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some of the earliest projectile points were so finely made that modern archaeologists, with all their tools and training, still struggle to reproduce them perfectly. These weren't just functional, they were beautiful, and it's hard not to see a little artistic pride in them. You notice something else. As the day winds down, the hunt becomes a story. The hunters reenact the chase. With exaggerated gestures, the gatherers laugh and mimic the sprinting antelope. Around the fire, they use their voices, still lacking true language, as you know it, but rich with rhythm, pitch, and pantomime, to retell the day's adventure. The group leans in captivated. These performances aren't just for entertainment. They pass on knowledge: where the herds roam, which plants are safe, how to avoid that one very grumpy rhinoceros. Social bonds are everything here. Cooperation means survival. You see someone share a piece of roasted meat with another family who came back empty-handed. A child falls asleep, curled against her grandmother's side, soot on her cheeks from the fire. There's no money, no houses, no clocks, just the steady rhythm of the sun, and the trust that tomorrow the group will wake and do it all again. But even in this seemingly simple life, danger lurks. The night can bring predators: lions, leopards, hyenas, snakes. Storms can strip away resources. And sometimes rival groups cross paths. It's not always peaceful. Humans have been competing with one another for as long as we've been human. Still, the evenings tend to end the same way. The fire burns low, and the voices quiet to murmurs. The truth about this stage of evolution is that hunting and gathering were not just about feeding the body, they were about feeding the mind. The campfire tales, the shared meals, the unspoken rules of fairness, these were the seeds of culture. And culture would prove to be just as vital for survival as spears and stone blades. Sitting here in your room tonight, you can almost hear the rustle of grass in the dark, the low hum of a group sharing the day's last stories. Your own ancestors once fell asleep to those sounds, trusting the circle of firelight to hold the night at bay. The wind is sharper now, carrying the scent of salt and ice. You've stepped forward in time to a moment of great courage and uncertainty, when Homo sapiens began to leave Africa. It's somewhere around 60,000, 70,000 years ago, and the world ahead is vast, strange, and unforgiving. But the pull to explore is irresistible. Picture a small group standing at the edge of the land they've always known, staring toward a horizon they cannot see beyond. Behind them lies the familiarity of African savannas with their herds of antelope, their rhythms of wet and dry seasons. Ahead lies the unknown deserts, jungles, mountains, ice. They don't have maps, compasses, or weather forecasts, just instinct, the sky, and stories told by those who scouted ahead. Historians still argue about exactly why our ancestors set out. Was it hunger driving them to find new hunting grounds? Curiosity pulling them toward distant fires on the horizon? Competition with other groups? Or were they simply following the herds that provided their survival? The truth is likely a tangled mix of reasons woven together like the plaited cords they use for carrying bundles. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some scientists think early humans may have crossed surprisingly harsh environments, not just by luck, but because they were great at following animal migration routes. They knew where herds would be, and by shadowing them, they discovered new lands, almost by accident. You walk with them now through dry grass that slowly gives way to sand. The sun is relentless by day. The cold bites hard at night. The air tastes different, drier, dustier. Water becomes precious, carried in animal skins. You see the group reading the land, constantly checking the wind, scanning for fresh prints, tasting plants to see if they're edible. Crossing these frontiers is a dangerous gamble. Some groups vanish into the wild and never return. but others push on, finding narrow passes through mountains, oases in the desert, fertile valleys after weeks of barren rock, and then coastlines. The sound of waves is strange and thrilling. For some, the journey will end here, living by the bounty of the sea. For others, this is just another beginning. Imagine standing with them on a pale strip of beach at dawn, watching the tide retreat, revealing mussels, crabs, and edible seaweed. They've never seen so much water, never felt the pull of tides before, but already they are learning its moods, marking safe times to gather food, teaching children which shellfish to leave alone. In time, some of these wanderers will push into Asia, Australia, Europe, carrying their fire, their stories, their survival skills. Every step leaves a genetic breadcrumb trail, tiny marks that still linger in you today. The truth about this moment in human evolution is that migration wasn't a single heroic trek. It was a slow, relentless spreading. Families moved, found new homes, and their descendants moved again. Over thousands of years, humans reached nearly every corner of the globe. And each journey began the same way, with a group standing at the edge of the familiar, stepping into the unknown. And here you are tonight, far from those beaches, but carrying in your bones the memory of that first bold step. You can almost feel the crunch of new sand underfoot, the sharp breath of cold air, and the hum of a world opening up in every direction. The air is colder now, heavy with the smell of damp earth and smoke from burning pine. You've arrived in Ice Age Europe, where the winters are long and survival is a daily negotiation with the cold. You're not alone here. There are neighbors, but they're not quite like you. Ahead, moving through the pale light of a low winter sun, you see them, the Neanderthals. They're shorter and stockier than you built for conserving heat. Their shoulders are broad, their chest deep, their limbs thick with muscle. Their faces are strong and forward, set with broad noses that help warm the freezing air before it reaches their lungs. They've been here far longer than your people have perfectly adapted to this land of ice and mammoths. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals were fundamentally different from us in intelligence and creativity, or whether they were simply another branch of the same human family tree. The archaeological record shows they made tools, beautiful specialized tools. They buried their dead with care. They may have worn jewelry, used pigments, and even carved simple symbols into stone. Here's a quirky tidbit. DNA evidence shows that they weren't just neighbors in the friendly sense. Some of them became very close neighbors. Modern humans outside of Africa carry small percentages of Neanderthal DNA, proof of ancient meetings that were more than just passing encounters. You watch a Neanderthal man chip a stone scraper, his thick hands surprisingly deft. A woman nearby tends a fire inside a wind-sheltered rock shelter. The smell of roasting meat drifts through the air. In the distance, children play, bundled in hides, their laughter surprisingly familiar. Your group and theirs eye each other warily at first, but curiosity is a powerful force. Maybe they trade a tool for a strip of dried meat. Maybe they share the location of a good hunting ground. Or maybe they simply sit together for a while, letting the fire do the talking. Neanderthal hunting parties move with astonishing coordination. You watch them work together to corner a reindeer against a ravine, then bring it down with thrusting spears. The kill is swift, but the butchery is meticulous. Every usable part of the animal will be carried back to camp meat, sinew, hide, bones for tools. Despite their skill, something is changing. Over the coming millennia, Neanderthals will disappear, replaced by expanding populations of Homo sapiens. Historians still argue over why. Was it competition for resources, a changing climate that hit them harder, diseases carried by newcomers, or were they slowly absorbed through interbreeding until the name Neanderthal was no longer distinct? Standing here with both groups, it's hard to imagine such a finality. The Neanderthals seemed too capable, too human to vanish. And yet the wind carries whispers of their coming absence. The truth about this moment in human evolution is that survival wasn't just about strength or skill. It was about adaptability. Your ancestors thrived not because they were invincible, but because they could adjust their strategies, learn from others, and carry those lessons forward. And as you sit now in your own warm room, far removed from that frozen plain you carry in your blood, a faint echo of those stocky cousins who once watched the same flicker of firelight dance across stone walls. You are in a small but undeniable way part Neanderthal. The air shifts again, warmer now, with the deep scent of earth and the faint musk of animal fat. You duck into darkness, and for a moment your eyes can't adjust. Then the flicker of torchlight catches the wall, and your breath catches with it. You're inside a cave, but not just any cave. This is a gallery, and the artists have been dead for tens of thousands of years. All around you, the walls come alive. Bison horses, aurochs, woolly rhinoceroses, they leap and twist in motion across the uneven rock. Lines and shading make their muscles ripple. A herd of deer seems to bound away from a painted hunter whose spear is forever mid-flight. The ochre reds, charcoal blacks, and yellow pigments are vivid even now, like whispers frozen in stone. These aren't random doodles. They're deliberate, skilled, and impossibly old. Historians still argue over the exact purpose of cave art. Was it spiritual magic meant to ensure a good hunt? Was it a way to teach young hunters about the animals they would track? Or was it simply art for art's sake, an ancient urge to create beauty for no reason other than the joy of making it? Here's a quirky tidbit. Some researchers believe the flickering firelight in the caves was part of the show. The moving light would make painted animals seem to run, leap, or shift, turning the cave walls into the first form of animation. Imagine sitting in that dark chamber torch, smoke curling upward, and watching the walls come alive with stampeding mammoths. You hear voices behind you, low murmurs, the sound of someone grinding pigment between stones, the scraping of a flint tool smoothing a patch of wall. A figure dips a brush of animal hair into a small stone bowl and adds the final line to a galloping horse. There is no rush here. Each stroke is careful, almost reverent. And it's not just the paintings. You see handprints, palms pressed in pigment and slapped against the stone, sometimes outlined by blowing powdered ochre around them. These prints are haunting someone's actual hand from 30,000 years ago, reaching across time to say, "I was here." You place your own hand against one and find it smaller, more delicate. Maybe it belonged to a young woman or an adolescent, reminding you that creativity has never been just a grown-up affair. The people who made these works are not the ragged, primitive caricatures you sometimes see in cartoons. They are observant, skilled, and deeply connected to their world. They understand how light plays on fur, how muscles shift beneath skin, how to tell a story with nothing but line and color. Outside the cave, their lives are still governed by the hunt, by the changing seasons, by the migration of herds. But here underground, they step outside the daily grind and into something eternal. Art gives them a voice that survives long after their bones have turned to dust. The truth about this stage of evolution is that by the time your ancestors could make art, they had crossed an invisible threshold. They weren't just surviving. They were reflecting, imagining, and leaving messages for a future they could never meet. And tonight, as you sit in the quiet glow of your own room, maybe a small lamp, or the blue light of your phone, you feel a kinship with those ancient artists. They too felt the urge to leave something behind, a trace of themselves that might last. They could never know that someday, tens of thousands of years later, you'd be here looking at their work in awe and feeling the warmth of their hands reach across the cold corridors of time. The cave air fades away, replaced by the salt-sharp tang of the sea. The sky is vast here, a sheet of pale blue merging with the horizon, and the sound of waves rolls endlessly in your ears. You've arrived at the edge of a shoreline, not just a place to gather shellfish, but the gateway to one of humanity's boldest leaps. It's around 50,000 years ago, and humans are becoming sailors. Not the kind with compasses, maps, and neatly coiled ropes, but the kind who look at a stretch of ocean and think, we can cross that. Standing beside you, a group of people begin dragging a strange craft toward the water bundles of logs lashed with vines, or perhaps a dugout hollowed from a massive tree trunk. This isn't just fishing close to shore. They're heading toward islands they can't even see. Historians still argue about the exact timeline of these voyages. Some believe our ancestors reached Australia by this time, navigating open seas that would daunt even modern adventurers. Did they plan their journeys carefully, or were they driven onward by storms, following birds and trusting the current to carry them to new shores? No one knows for certain. Here's a quirky tidbit. There's evidence that early voyagers might have carried fire with them on their rafts, carefully protecting embers in clay or shells, so they could start cooking immediately upon landing. Imagine balancing a tiny, glowing coal as precious cargo while bobbing in the middle of a restless ocean. You push off with them, now feet wet the raft shifting under your weight. The first swells are gentle, but soon you're rolling with the deep rhythm of the open sea. The air smells clean, sharp, alive. Flying fish leap beside the boat. Seabirds circle above. Days pass. The sun burns your shoulders by day, the cold bites at night, and the ocean never stops its deep breathing beneath you. Then land. A dark smudge on the horizon grows into a shape of green hills and sandy bays. The first landing is a moment of pure relief. People leap into the surf, laughing, crying, carrying bundles of food tools and children to the shore. Soon fires are burning, fish are roasting, and the island begins to echo with human voices for the first time in history. This mastery of the sea changes everything. Suddenly, the map of human life isn't just limited to the continents connected by land bridges. It spreads across archipelagos, coastlines, and distant islands. And each voyage carries not just people, but their knowledge, tools, and stories. The truth about this stage of evolution is that seafaring is both a survival skill and a statement of daring. It says, we will not be limited by what we can see. And that same daring is still inside you, even if your own voyages involve little more than a budget flight and a dodgy rental car. Tonight, as you listen to the quiet hum of your own surroundings, imagine the hush that falls on a new shore after the fire has been lit and the stars come out somewhere your ancestors reached by trusting their lives to wood rope and the endless, shifting sea. The ocean breeze fades into the soft rustle of leaves, and you find yourself in a small clearing, the air rich with the smell of damp soil and fresh grass. The year is somewhere around 12,000 years ago, and your ancestors are about to make a choice that will change the course of human history. It's not flashy, no epic battle or grand invention, just a quiet, steady shift from wandering to staying put. It begins with seeds. Someone, perhaps out of boredom or curiosity, notices that the grains they drop near camp seem to sprout and grow. Maybe they saw wild wheat or barley thriving where discarded food had fallen. Maybe they realized that by protecting a patch of ground from grazing animals, they could return later and find more food than before. Historians still argue whether farming began by accident or through a deliberate plan. But either way, this small insight reshapes everything. A quirky tidbit for you early farmers didn't just plant food for themselves. They planted snacks for ducks, mice, and bugs too. Agriculture was messy in the beginning, full of trial and error. Some plots failed completely. Others produced more than a family could eat. But slowly, the idea caught on. You walk among a group carefully tending a small field. They're using sticks to poke holes in the soil, dropping in seeds, and covering them with loose earth. In the distance, another group herds goats toward a rough enclosure. The goats don't know it yet, but they've just been recruited into humanity's long-term plan. The shift to farming means no longer chasing herds across endless plains. People can settle near rivers, lakes, and fertile valleys, building more permanent shelters. Clay pots appear for storing grain, woven baskets for carrying harvests, and grinding stones for turning seeds into flour. With steady food supplies, families grow larger. Communities expand. Of course, it's not all sunshine and wheat fields. Farming ties you to one place, making you vulnerable to droughts, floods, and pests. A bad year can starve a whole village, and the work is relentless: planting, weeding, harvesting, storing. The romantic image of early farmers strolling through golden fields is a lie. Most of the time, they're bent over sweating, swatting flies. Yet something has shifted in the human mind. This isn't just about food, it's about security. It's about shaping the land itself, bending it to human will. Villages spring up in places like the Fertile Crescent, where wheat, barley, lentils, and peas thrive. Elsewhere, rice paddies spread across Asia, maize fields across the Americas. And slowly, the web of agriculture begins to wrap around the world. The truth about this stage of evolution is that farming doesn't just feed the body, it changes the very structure of human society. Once you have fields to tend, you need to defend them. Once you store food, you need ways to protect it. Ownership, territory, and long-term planning become part of daily life. As you sit tonight in your comfortable room, perhaps sipping tea or nibbling on a late-night snack, you're tasting the legacy of that first decision to plant seeds instead of wandering after game. Your whole life, your home, your schedule, even the fact that you can plan a grocery list rests on the quiet ancient gamble that those seeds would grow. The breeze through the fields fades, replaced by the low murmur of voices and the muffled thump of footsteps on packed earth. You've stepped forward again now into the heart of an early farming settlement. The smell of smoke from hearth fires mixes with the scent of drying grain. You hear the chatter of people busy at their daily work, the clink of clay pots, the creak of woven baskets shifting under their loads. You're walking through one of humanity's first true villages. The homes are simple mud brick walls, reed-thatched roofs, but sturdy enough to stand for years. Chickens scratch in the dirt between houses, goats bleat from a nearby pen. Women sit in small groups weaving baskets from reeds or shaping wet clay into pots. Children run between them carrying water in small gourds, laughing until they trip and spill half of it. Historians still argue whether village life was a blessing or a trap. On one hand, it offered safety, community, and the chance to share resources. On the other, it tied people to one location, made disease easier to spread, and sometimes locked families into endless cycles of labor. Here's a quirky tidbit. The earliest pottery wasn't just for storing food, it was also for showing off. Some pots were decorated with intricate patterns even though they'd be hidden away in storage pits most of the time. Apparently, humans have always had a streak of "look at my cool new stuff" in them. Life here is a blend of the practical and the communal. You watch a man repair a fishing net while listening to his neighbor gossip about a family on the far side of the settlement. Someone calls out in a sing-song voice, summoning people to share in the day's fresh bread. The scent of flatbreads baking on a hot stone drifts through the air, making your stomach growl. Farming families trade with their neighbors, grain for fish milk, for meat, woven cloth for clay jars. But these aren't just economic exchanges. They're threads weaving the community together. And in the evenings after the day's work is done, people gather to tell stories. These are no longer just about the hunt. Now they're about ancestors, about the land, about the bargains struck with the spirits who watch over the crops. The shift from nomadic life to village life changes more than how people eat. It changes how they think. They start to imagine the future in seasons and years, not just in days and hunts. They plan for planting, for harvest, for storage. They mark the passing of time with festivals and rituals. And with more people living close together, there's more time to share ideas. Weaving pattern-spread cooking techniques improve, and knowledge about the land deepens. But there's also more potential for conflict disputes over land boundaries, food stores, or even marriage agreements. Village life means learning to navigate human politics as much as nature's moods. The truth about this stage of human evolution is that it's the foundation of everything you know as civilization. Roads, cities, nations, all begin here in clusters of homes where people agree mostly to live side by side. As you sit in your room tonight, maybe glancing toward the faint glow of city lights or listening to the hum of traffic, remember that you're part of a chain stretching back to those first clay-walled villages. The sound of your neighbors, the rhythm of your daily routines, all of it echoes those early days when humans decided that staying put could be just as adventurous as moving on. The village hum fades into a harder, more metallic sound, clang, 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 as you step into the age of bronze. The smell of wood smoke is sharper now, laced with the tang of molten metal. You find yourself in a bustling settlement where people are no longer shaping their world only with stone, clay, and wood. They've learned the art of smelting copper and tin together, and the result is stronger, sharper, and far more durable than anything they've had before bronze. In an open-sided workshop, a craftsman hunches over a small clay furnace, pumping a goatskin bellows with steady rhythm. Sparks jump into the air. Inside the metal glows orange, soft enough to pour into stone molds. When the craftsman tips the crucible, the molten bronze flows like honey into a waiting axe head mold. In moments, the future is cooling before your eyes. Historians still argue whether the Bronze Age began because of technological genius or because necessity pushed people to look beyond stone. Some say dwindling high-quality flint deposits forced experimentation. Others believe metallurgists stumbled upon bronze accidentally, while smelting copper ores mixed with tin. Here's a quirky tidbit. Bronze wasn't just used for tools and weapons. It was also a status symbol. Wealthy elites commissioned ornate bronze vessels, mirrors, and jewelry, using their shine to flaunt their importance. In other words, humanity had invented both the sword and the bling. You wander through the settlement. Farmers now use bronze sickles to harvest grain. Hunters carry bronze-tipped spears that pierce more cleanly than stone. Traders arrive with carts bringing tin from far-off lands, exchanging it for woven cloth, dried fish, and polished amber. The air buzzes with bargaining voices, the smell of cooking meat, and the occasional bray of a tethered donkey. But bronze changes more than tools. It changes the way humans live together. With better weapons, armies grow. Small fortified towns rise on hillsides, their walls built to protect not just people, but stores of precious metal. You can see one now, its timber-framed walls crowned with watchtowers. The gates stand open for the moment, but guards lean lazily on spears scanning the road. Inside the walls, you notice that life feels more organized and more unequal. Skilled metalworkers and traders live in sturdy houses. Farmers and herders work harder and live simpler lives. Leaders, chiefs, kings, or ambitious warriors use their control over bronze to hold power. Religion begins to shift as well. Bronze-tipped spears and swords accompany warriors into their graves, meant to arm them in the afterlife. Temples are raised to gods of war harvest, and sky their altars bright with offerings. People gather for seasonal festivals dressed in their best bronze ornaments, their dances glinting in firelight. The truth about this moment in human evolution is that technology is no longer just about survival. It's about influence, identity, and ambition. Bronze gives humans the power to defend, to conquer, to trade over long distances. It also ties communities together in complex webs of dependency. The farmer needs the smith needs the trader needs the distant miner. As you sit tonight in your own time, maybe touching the cool surface of a kitchen knife or a brass key, you're holding the descendant of that first leap into metal. And somewhere deep in the quiet of the night, you can almost hear the steady beat of a hammer on bronze echoing across 4,000 years. The ring of hammer on bronze fades, replaced by the scratch of a stylus across damp clay. You've stepped into a quieter revolution, one that doesn't glitter in the sunlight, but will change human life even more profoundly. Around you are rows of low mud brick buildings, their walls plastered smooth, the air warm and still, except for the faint scent of baked earth. You're in one of humanity's first cities, and you are about to witness the birth of writing. In the shade of an open courtyard, a scribe kneels beside a flat table. Before him lies a damp clay tablet. With precise practice strokes, he presses a reed stylus into its surface, leaving wedge-shaped marks cuneiform. At first, these symbols are simple, a pictograph for grain, another for a goat, one for a jar of oil. But they're more than pictures, they're agreements. This tablet will remind the temple that a farmer delivered 3 baskets of barley, or that a trader promised 10 jars of olive oil by the next moon. Historians still argue whether writing began primarily for storytelling or for bookkeeping. The evidence leans toward the latter, bureaucracy, not poetry. But soon enough, the system that kept track of taxes and harvests also began to capture myths, prayers, and histories. Here's a quirky tidbit. The earliest known writer's complaint comes from an ancient Mesopotamian tablet, where a teacher scolds a lazy student for skipping practice. It seems the world has always had homework. You move deeper into the city. Market stalls line the streets, voices rising and falling in the rhythm of bargaining. A woman counts clay tokens into a customer's hand, sealing the deal with a nod. Nearby, a temple looms over the rooftops, a stepped ziggurat reaching toward the sky. Priests climb its stairs to offer incense and chant to the gods their words now recorded for future generations. Writing changes the nature of power. Laws can now be fixed in clay or carved in stone, making them harder to twist or forget. Kings can issue decrees that reach far-flung corners of their realms. Merchants can send instructions and contracts over long distances without relying solely on memory or trust. And writing changes the nature of memory itself. No longer must every story be carried in the mind of a living storyteller. The epics of heroes, the cycles of seasons, the wisdom of elders, all can be preserved beyond the lifespan of their authors. You can imagine a child centuries from now pressing their fingers into the grooves of an ancient inscription, feeling the echo of a voice long gone. Of course, literacy is not for everyone. In this city, only a small class of scribes and scholars can read and write, their skill honed over years. They are both admired and feared, for their control over information is a quiet form of power. The truth about this moment in human evolution is that writing doesn't just record history, it makes history possible. It gives humans a way to speak across time, to hold conversations with the future. Without it, the long winding story of humanity would be mostly silence. As you sit tonight in your own quiet room, maybe tapping a few words into a glowing screen, remember that you are doing what the first scribes dreamed, of leaving a mark that might be read by someone far away, maybe even long after you're gone. And somewhere in the stillness, you can almost hear the soft press of a reed into clay, carrying a message forward through the centuries. The scent of damp clay and ink fades into the smell of spices, warm cinnamon, sharp pepper, and sweet cardamom drifting through the air. You've stepped into the beating heart of trade where dusty roads stretch for thousands of miles and ships sway at anchor in far-flung harbors. This is the age when humanity truly begins to knit itself together, when goods, ideas, and stories flow across continents. You're standing in a bustling market along a caravan route. Around you, merchants haggle over bolts of silk, baskets of fragrant saffron, and sacks of gleaming salt. Camels kneel in the shade, their loads wrapped in woven blankets. Traders from distant lands shout prices in unfamiliar languages, their voices mingling into a living music of commerce. Historians still argue about which trade network was truly the first global connector. Was it the Silk Road linking China to the Mediterranean? Was it the sea lanes of the Indian Ocean carrying ivory, pearls, and spices? Or was it a patchwork of smaller routes slowly woven together over centuries? Whatever the answer, the effect is the same worlds, once separated by thousands of miles, are now in conversation. Here's a quirky tidbit. Peppercorns from India have been found stuffed into the nostrils of Egyptian mummies, a kind of aromatic afterlife upgrade. Imagine the journey: pepper grown in the lush hills of southern India, carried on ships across the Arabian Sea, hauled overland on camel caravans, and finally tucked into the embalming wrappings of a pharaoh. Trade is more than goods. Alongside silk and spices come music, mathematics, religious beliefs, and even diseases. The compass spreads from China, Arabic numerals cross into Europe, and tales from one coast are retold on another in new accents. A merchant might bring back not just cargo, but new recipes, new songs, and news of far-off kingdoms. In the city's harbour, ships unload their treasures: glazed pottery from Persia, gold from Africa, fine paper from China. The waterfront smells of tar and salt gulls screaming overhead as porters haul cargo down gangplanks. At the same time, caravans set out across the desert, their silhouettes fading into the mirage-shimmered horizon. The spread of trade also shapes politics. Wealthy city-states grow powerful by controlling key routes. Fortified caravanserais, roadside inns dot the deserts, offering merchants safety, food, and gossip. And in these places, strangers share firelight, swapping stories of gods and kings, storms and shipwrecks, victories and defeats. The truth about this moment in human evolution is that it shows just how restless our species is. We're not content to keep what we have. We're driven to seek what lies beyond the next mountain, the next wave, the next bend in the river. Trade is simply the physical form of that longing, a conversation carried in sacks and crates. Tonight, as you sit in your own space, maybe sipping tea from a distant land or scrolling through news from another hemisphere, you're living in the legacy of those ancient exchanges. And if you close your eyes, you can almost hear the camel bells jingling, the creak of wooden hulls, and the murmur of deals struck in a dozen languages under the same endless sky. The scent of spice fades into incense smoke, sweet and heavy, curling upward into the rafters of a temple. The light is dim here, filtered through cloth banners painted with symbols of gods and spirits. You've stepped into the world of belief, where humanity's imagination turns skyward inward and into the unseen. Before you robed, figures move in slow, deliberate gestures. One sprinkles crushed herbs onto a glowing brazier, sending up fragrant clouds. Another chants in a low, steady rhythm, his voice echoing off stone walls. The floor is smooth from countless bare feet. In the corner, an offering table holds baskets of grain-carved figurines and small bowls of honey. Historians still argue whether religion began as a way to explain the world's mysteries, or as a glue to hold communities together. Was it born when someone first looked at the stars and wondered who placed them there? Or when a hunter thanked an unseen force for the deer that fed his family? Or was it perhaps the first attempt at law, a set of shared rules backed by the authority of the divine? Here's a quirky tidbit. Some of the earliest known religious structures, like Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, were built before agriculture became widespread. That means people gathered to worship together before they built villages to live in. Belief, it seems, may have been as essential as bread. You leave the temple and step into the open air. Across the world, belief takes many forms: painted masks in African villages, stone totems in the Americas, sacred groves in Europe, towering statues in Asia. Some groups honor ancestor spirits who watch over the living. Others bow to gods who command storms, rivers, and harvests. Still others see the divine in the sun, the moon, or the turning of the seasons. Belief shapes the landscape. Pilgrimage routes wind across mountains and deserts. Temples rise in city centers, their spires or domes dominating the skyline. Even small villages have shrines tucked into corners where travelers pause to murmur a prayer before continuing on their way. Belief also shapes human behavior. Festivals mark the planting and harvest, the longest day the return of the rains. In these moments, entire communities come together, singing, feasting, dancing, reaffirming that they belong to something larger than themselves. But belief can also draw lines. My God versus your God. My sacred truth against yours. When these differences harden, they can fuel rivalries, even wars. Yet even in conflict, the impulse behind belief remains oddly similar. A yearning for meaning, for order, for connection to the unseen. The truth about this stage of human evolution is that belief isn't just about gods. It's about stories. Humans are storytelling creatures, and religion is the grandest, oldest story we tell ourselves about who we are, where we came from, and why we matter. Tonight, as you sit in your own quiet space, maybe you light a candle, or glance at a family heirloom, or think of a loved one far away. In that small moment of reflection, you're doing what humans have done for tens of thousands of years, reaching past the visible, hoping to touch the invisible. And somewhere in the hush, you can almost hear the ancient chants drifting through stone halls under a sky of stars. The scent of incense drifts away, replaced by the metallic clink of armor and the rhythmic stomp of marching feet. You've stepped into an age when belief, ambition, and survival mix into something fierce, when warriors and wanderers shape the map of the world. Before you stretches a road beaten flat by thousands of footsteps. A column of warriors moves toward the horizon, their spears upright, their shields slung across their backs. Dust rises with each step, hanging in the air. They're not just moving to defend their home, they're heading into someone else's. Historians still argue over which mattered more in this era, the desire to protect what you have or the hunger to take what others hold. Some migrations were driven by famine, drought, or disaster. Others by ambition leaders dreaming of ruling lands they'd never even seen. And sometimes it was both desperate movement blending into deliberate conquest. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some ancient steppe nomads could shoot arrows accurately, while galloping full speed on horseback, a skill so terrifying that entire empires trembled at the sight of their riders cresting the hills. Imagine trying to hold your dinner plate steady at a brisk walk, and you'll understand just how impossible that sounds. You follow one group into the heart of their journey. They set up camp in a sheltered valley, tents staked against the wind. Around the fires, they eat salted meat, mend saddles, and sharpen blades. Songs rise in the dark, some bold and boastful, others quiet longing for the valleys left behind. Children chase each other between campfires, their laughter darting like sparks. Far away, another kind of wanderer is on the move, merchants, monks, and explorers. They travel lighter, but no less bravely, following caravan routes or river paths, trading goods and news from one end of the continent to the other. A Buddhist monk might carry scripture across mountains. A desert trader might bring word of new kingdoms rising far to the east. An explorer might stumble upon lands unknown to his own people and bring home both wonder and trouble. Migrations change the world in subtle and explosive ways. New foods appear in strange places, grapes, where they've never grown, spices in kitchens that once knew only salt. Languages merge, borrowing words until they no longer sound like the tongues that gave them birth. Gods travel with their followers, setting up shrines in foreign soil. And sometimes armies settle where they've conquered, blending bloodlines, until the invader and the invaded are no longer strangers. The truth about this moment in human evolution is that movement is in our bones. Even when life seems settled, humans itch to see beyond the next hill. Sometimes that restlessness builds cities. Other times it burns them down. And as you sit in your still room tonight, you can feel it, the echo of hooves on hard ground, the flap of canvas in the wind, the long pull of the horizon calling you forward. Somewhere inside you is both the warrior and the wanderer, both the one who stays and the one who goes. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear the hoofbeats fading into the distance, carrying the story of humankind onward. The hoofbeats fade into the hum of many voices, the creak of wagon wheels, and the splash of oars dipping into a wide river. You've stepped into an age when villages have grown into towns, and towns have blossomed into cities, each one a knot in an ever tighter web of human connection. Roads stretch across entire continents, ships cross seas in regular rhythms, and a traveler can move farther in a lifetime than their ancestors could in 100 generations. You walk along a bustling street paved with worn stones. Merchants shout from stalls piled high with figs, olives, bolts of dyed cloth. The air smells of baking bread, roasted fish, and fresh-cut herbs. A group of sailors pushes past their clothes, still stiff with salt from a long voyage. Two scribes stand in a doorway reading aloud the latest news posted on a clay tablet or parchment notice. Historians still argue whether this age of networks was driven more by trade politics or necessity. Empires build roads to move armies quickly, but merchants use them to carry wine and grain. Rivers are bridged for military control, but farmers use them to send crops downstream. Every improvement meant for power also opens the door to connection. Here's a quirky tidbit. The Roman postal system was so efficient that letters could travel faster across the empire 2,000 years ago than they could in some countries well into the 19th century. Picture a relay of horses fresh at each stop, galloping your message across hundreds of miles without pause. You leave the city walls and follow a wide road lined with mile markers. Along the route, you pass travelers from far-flung places, a family driving a cart loaded with pottery, a scholar carrying scrolls in a leather case, a soldier marching toward a distant outpost. At roadside inns, strangers sit shoulder to shoulder over bowls of stew, swapping news in a jumble of languages. And it's not just the roads. The seas are busy highways with ships carrying grain from Egypt to Rome. spices from the east to Europe, amber from the Baltic to the Mediterranean. Harbours are alive with the thud of cargo, the screech of gulls, the calls of sailors negotiating their next voyage. This network of movement changes the human mind. People begin to think in wider circles. A merchant in one city understands that the fate of his trade depends on the harvest in another hundreds of miles away. A philosopher hears of ideas from lands he will never see. A king's decision ripples outward, affecting lives in distant ports and mountain villages. The truth about this stage of human evolution is that the threads of connection once woven are nearly impossible to unravel. Cultures borrow, blend, and adapt until the idea of a completely isolated people becomes almost unimaginable. And here you are tonight, part of that same great weave, your phone buzzing with a message from someone across the globe. Your dinner ingredients may be grown in another hemisphere. The ancient roads are now flight paths, the harbours replaced by airports, but the hum of connection is the same. And if you close your eyes, you can almost feel the pulse of those old networks like a heartbeat, running through the bones of the earth itself. The hum of trade routes and crowded harbours softens into the quieter, more familiar sounds of the present distant traffic. The muted hum of electricity, perhaps the faint tick of a clock in your room. You've reached the edge of the story, standing firmly in your own time, but you can feel the weight of all the ages behind you. You think about how far you've come in this long walk through history, from stardust swirling in the wake of ancient supernovas to the first upright steps on the African plains, from chipped stone tools to glowing screens in your palm, from the flicker of campfires in the dark to the constant glow of cities seen from space. You are the living echo of every ancestor who took a risk, made a leap, survived a hard winter, or shared a scrap of food by the fire. Historians still argue whether the pace of change we live in today is the fastest in history, or whether it only feels that way because we can see so much more of the world at once. But one thing is certain: humanity has never been able to see itself so clearly in the mirror of the past. Every discovery in genetics, archaeology, and anthropology is another thread tying you more tightly to the people who came before. Here's a quirky tidbit. If you could meet your many times great-grandparents from 50,000 years ago, you might find them surprisingly relatable. Yes, they'd smell like smoke and wear hides instead of hoodies, but their laughter, curiosity, and frustration would feel familiar. You'd recognize the sparkle of a joke in their eyes, the tenderness in the way they held their children. Standing here in the present, you can see the future stretching ahead like a road at dusk. Who will look back on you as their ancestor? What tools will they carry? What stories will they tell about this time? The time when humans first lived, both in the physical world and in a vast, invisible digital one. The truth about human evolution is that it isn't over. It never will be. Your bones, your DNA, your thoughts, they're all chapters in a book still being written. 1,000,000 years from now, someone might trace the curve of their own hand and find it still matches yours. Or they might tell a story about an age when people lived on a blue-green planet, gazing up at the stars from the very same ground you stand on tonight. And as you sit in your quiet room, you feel the long chain of history stretching from the birth of the cosmos to the beating of your own heart. You are both the latest link and the beginning of something yet to come. Now let your breathing slow. The rushing journey of ages fades like ripples smoothing on a long, still lake. The distant voices of ancestors soften into silence, the fires they tended dimming to a gentle ember-red glow in your mind. Imagine yourself lying beneath a night sky so vast and star-filled that it humbles every thought, Above you, the same stars that once guided the first migrations still keep their silent watch. They shine unchanged over the fields where the first seeds were planted, over the mountains crossed by traders over the harbors, where sails filled with wind. They shine now over you in this quiet moment, between waking and sleep. Feel the weight of the blankets over your body, your shelter against the night, just as fur and hides once wrapped your ancestors against the cold. Listen for the smallest sounds in your room, the whisper of air through a vent, the soft creak of the floor, the distant hush of the world beyond your walls. Every sound is part of the same timeless lullaby that has always carried humanity into rest. You are safe here. No predators stalk the edges of your camp. No sudden blizzard threatens to steal your warmth. The battles are far away, the fields are tended, the journey is paused. All that's left for you now is to close your eyes and drift. With each slow breath, the long story you've walked tonight folds neatly into the quiet of your mind. The upright steps of Australopithecus, the daring of the first sailors, the bright spark of fire, the hum of ancient marketplaces, all dissolve into a soft, dream-colored haze. And as sleep begins to take you, remember, you are part of this great story woven through time. You have walked with the first humans, sailed uncharted seas, knelt beside the first fires, pressed your hand against the painted walls of forgotten caves. You carry all of them with you, and tonight they will walk with you in your dreams.